The moon dance was only 6 days away. Across the Comanche plains, riders were already arriving from distant camps. Daughters of chiefs, daughters of traders, young women whose beauty was spoken of around countless campfires. Everyone knew why they had come. The moon dance was more than a celebration. It was the one night every year when the Comanche king would publicly choose the woman who would stand beside him. This year, rumors spread farther than ever. People whispered that more than 100 young women would attend. Some came for honor. Some came for power. Some came because they dreamed of becoming queen. And then there was Lena. No one had invited her. No one even remembered she existed. The young white woman balanced 2 heavy water buckets across her shoulders as she walked between the lodges. Dust clung to the hem of her faded dress. Her hands were rough from scrubbing hides and hauling water. A year ago, she had belonged to a wealthy merchant family traveling west. Then raiders attacked their wagon train. Most of the adults died. The survivors were scattered across the frontier. Since then, Lena had lived among the Comanche. Not as family, not as a guest, simply as a servant. A captive nobody bothered to hate. And nobody cared enough to love. Move faster. The sharp voice came from an older woman cleaning buffalo hides. The visitors arrive tomorrow. Lena nodded. Yes, ma'am. She kept walking, kept working, kept surviving. That had become her entire life. Survival, nothing more. As the sun lowered across the plains, the camp grew busier. Warriors repaired horse tack. Women prepared food. Children chased each other between the lodges. Everyone talked about the moon dance. Everyone except Lena. Because dreams were dangerous things, especially for people who belonged nowhere. That evening, she carried fresh water toward the king's lodge. Not inside. Never inside. Servants left supplies outside the entrance, then walked away. That was the rule. Lena set down the buckets carefully. As she turned to leave, 2 beautifully dressed young women approached. Both daughters of respected chiefs. Both laughing. One glanced at Lena, then at her worn dress. The smile on her face changed instantly. You'll have a good view of the moon dance. The other girl laughed. From the servant fires. More laughter. Lena lowered her eyes. Not because their words hurt. Because she was tired of pretending they didn't. The girls walked away, their voices fading into the evening wind. For several moments, Lena remained still, watching the golden light spread across the camp, watching people prepare for a future she would never be part of. Then she picked up the empty buckets and continued walking. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond the camp. Beautiful, lonely, much like her. That night, long after most fires burned low, Lena couldn't sleep. The air felt strange, restless. She stepped outside the small servant shelter and looked toward the stars. Moonlight covered the plains in silver. Everything seemed peaceful, until she heard it. A horse, far beyond the edge of camp. Then another sound, a muffled curse. Human. Pain. Lena hesitated. The sensible choice was simple. Go back inside. Ignore it. Someone else would handle it. Someone important. But something in the darkness pulled at her. So she followed the sound. Past the last lodge. Past the horse pens. Into the quiet prairie beyond the campfires. The grass moved softly in the night wind. Then she saw him. A man lying beside a fallen horse. Partially hidden in the shadows. Blood darkened his sleeve. One hand pressed against his side. The stranger looked up when he heard her approach. His eyes were sharp despite the pain. Dangerous eyes. Warrior eyes. For a moment neither spoke. Then the man finally asked, "Why did you come?" Lena swallowed. Because honestly, she didn't know. The wind moved across the prairie. The stars watched silently overhead. And somewhere beyond the camp, the moon dance drew closer. Neither of them knew it yet. But this meeting would change both their lives forever. The stranger studied her for several seconds. The prairie was silent except for the wind moving through the tall grass. "Why did you come?" he asked again. His voice was calm. Not angry. Not grateful either. Simply curious. Lena shifted uneasily beneath his gaze. Up close, the man looked even. More dangerous than she had first imagined. Broad shoulders. Weathered face. Long black hair tied behind his neck. Everything about him suggested a warrior accustomed to giving orders rather than receiving them. Yet he sat alone in the darkness, bleeding. "I heard your horse," Lena answered quietly. The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. Most people would have kept walking. A faint smile touched her lips. Most people are smarter than I am. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. but close. The horse beside him snorted softly. Only then did Lena notice the animal's front leg. A deep cut ran across the lower joint. Not fatal, but painful. The horse had stumbled, thrown its rider. The stranger followed her gaze. He'll recover. You sound certain. I know horses. For a moment neither spoke. Then Lena crouched beside him. You should let me see the wound. His eyes hardened instantly. No. She blinked. No. No. The answer came so quickly it almost made her laugh. The stranger winced as he shifted position. Blood was still soaking through his buckskin shirt. Lena folded her arms. You are bleeding. I've noticed. And you're refusing help. I've survived worse. Maybe. She tilted her head slightly. But surviving isn't the same thing as healing. The stranger looked away first. The silence stretched. Then finally he sighed. A small sound. Almost defeated. Fine. Lena moved carefully. The wound sat just beneath his ribs. A knife cut. Not deep enough to kill. Deep enough to become dangerous if ignored. She tore a strip from the bottom of her already ruined dress. The fabric ripped with a soft sound. The stranger noticed. That was your only good dress. Lena laughed. The sound surprised both of them. No. She wrapped the cloth firmly around his side. My only dress. For the first time, the stranger looked genuinely caught off guard. As if he wasn't accustomed to hearing jokes from people in difficult situations. The moon climbed higher. Silver light spilled across the prairie. Lena finished tying the bandage. There. The stranger glanced down. The work was simple, not professional, but effective. You've done this before. She shrugged. My father was always getting hurt. The words escaped before she could stop them. A shadow crossed her face. The stranger noticed immediately. What happened to him? Lena stared into the darkness. For a long moment, she considered lying. It would be easier. Safer. But something about this man made dishonesty feel unnecessary. He died. The stranger remained quiet. Waiting. He believed people were mostly good. A sad smile touched her lips. That turned out to be an expensive belief. The wind carried her words away. The stranger watched her carefully. Most people spoke to him with fear. Or admiration. Or expectation. This woman spoke like she had forgotten she was supposed to be impressed by anyone. It was strangely refreshing. You miss him? Lena nodded. Every day. The stranger looked toward the stars. So do I. The answer surprised her. She glanced at him. For the first time, he looked less like a warrior. Less like a threat. More like a man carrying something heavy. Something invisible. Neither asked questions. Some wounds belonged to silence. The horse shifted again. Lena reached into the small cloth pouch hanging from her belt. She pulled out half of a corn cake. Her entire supper. The stranger noticed immediately. You should keep that. She broke it in half. Handed him a piece. You need it more. His expression hardened. No. Lena rolled her eyes. You refuse everything. The stranger almost smiled again. Almost. After a brief hesitation, he accepted the food. The corn cake was dry. Plain. Hardly worth mentioning. Yet he ate it slowly. As though it mattered. As though he understood exactly what the gift cost her. When he finished, neither spoke for several moments. The campfires glowed faintly in the distance. 100 visitors would arrive tomorrow. 100 women hoping to become queen. The entire camp was preparing for celebration. Yet somehow this quiet conversation felt more important than any feast. Finally, the stranger broke the silence. If you were free. Lena looked up. If I was free. He nodded. If you could go anywhere. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. She stared toward the horizon, toward the endless sea of moonlit grass. I don't know. The stranger waited. After a while she continued. I used to think I'd travel. See cities. See mountains. See oceans. A faint smile appeared. Now. She lowered her eyes. Now I'd settle for a place where I belong. The words hung between them. Simple. Honest. Painfully so. The stranger said nothing. But something changed behind his eyes. A look she couldn't quite understand. As if her answer mattered far more than it should have. Far more than a stranger's answer ought to matter. At last he pushed himself carefully to his feet. The movement cost him. She could see it. But he refused to show weakness. The horse rose beside him. Ready. Lena stood as well. You should return to camp. He nodded. So should you. For a moment neither moved. Then the stranger reached into a small leather pouch. He withdrew a carved wooden token. Simple. Handmade. The shape of a crescent moon. He placed it in her hand. Lena frowned. What is this? A reminder. Of what? The stranger looked toward the distant campfires. Then back at her. That kindness is rarely forgotten. Before she could ask another question, he mounted the horse. The animal moved smoothly despite its injury. The stranger turned once. Moonlight illuminated his face. His expression unreadable. Then horse and rider disappeared into the darkness, leaving Lena alone beneath the stars. She looked down at the carved moon resting in her palm. A strange feeling settled over her. Not hope, not yet, but something close. Far away, beyond the campfires, drums began to sound. The first preparations for the moon dance had begun, and somewhere within the sleeping camp, the most powerful man in the Comanche nation was thinking about a servant girl no one else seemed to notice. The next morning, Ghost Wind Camp woke before sunrise. Lena was already working when the first riders appeared. She heard them before she saw them. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. Then voices. Laughter. Music. The entire camp seemed to shift. Excitement spread through the lodges like fire through dry grass. Moon Dance Week had officially begun. Lena stood beside a water barrel, watching from a distance. The first group rode through the eastern entrance shortly after dawn. Young women dressed in bright buckskin. Silver jewelry glimmered in the morning sun. Beaded dresses moved like flowing water as they dismounted. Every one of them beautiful. Every one of them confident. Some traveled with entire families. Others arrived with warriors acting as escorts. People greeted them warmly. Children ran beside their horses. Older women admired their clothing. Men openly stared. Lena lowered her eyes and returned to work. This world had nothing to do with her. By midday, more riders arrived. Then more. And more. The camp grew crowded. Colorful. Alive. The smell of cooking meat filled the air. Drums echoed across the prairie. Laughter seemed to come from every direction. For everyone else, it felt like a celebration. For Lena, it felt like a reminder. A reminder that she did not belong. She spent most of the afternoon hauling water between the guest lodges. The work kept her busy, which was good, because busy people had less time to think. As she approached one of the larger lodges, she heard voices inside. Female voices. Several of them. My father spoke with the king's advisors. They say he will choose this year. Of course he will. More laughter. Lena continued walking. Then another voice spoke. What about the servant girl? The laughter grew louder. Which one? The white one. Another burst of amusement. Someone answered. She's barely worth noticing. Lena kept walking. Her expression never changed. She had heard worse. Much worse. Still, some wounds never stopped stinging. The afternoon sun moved lower across the sky. More visitors continued arriving. By evening, nearly 100 young women had gathered in camp, just as the rumors promised. Some were daughters of chiefs. Some came from wealthy trading families. Others belonged to respected warrior bloodlines. Each believed she had a chance. Each believed she would be noticed. Lena passed among them carrying baskets of supplies. Invisible, as always. Yet something unusual happened that evening. Something small. Something nobody else seemed to notice. As Lena crossed the central gathering area carrying firewood, she felt someone watching her. The sensation was immediate. Strong. She looked up. Across the camp, seated beside a council fire, sat the stranger from the prairie. For a moment her heart stopped. He looked different now. Cleaner. Stronger. Surrounded by warriors. Several older chiefs sat nearby. They spoke quietly among themselves. The stranger listened more than he talked. But whenever he spoke, everyone listened. Lena frowned. Who was he? The question lingered. The stranger's eyes met hers briefly. Only briefly. Then he returned his attention to the council. As though nothing had happened. As though they were complete strangers. Lena felt oddly disappointed. The feeling annoyed her immediately. Why should she care? She adjusted the firewood and continued walking. Yet throughout the evening, she caught herself looking toward the council fire. And every time she did, the stranger seemed to be there. Watching. Not constantly. Not obviously. Just enough to make her wonder. The sky darkened. Stars appeared overhead. Music drifted through camp. Several young women practiced traditional dances around the larger fires. Their movements were graceful. Elegant. People gathered to watch. Applause followed. Lena watched from a distance. Then returned to cleaning cooking pots. As she scrubbed the final iron kettle, an older woman approached. Grandmother Ayana. one of the few elders who never treated Lena cruelly. The old woman studied her for a moment. You should be watching the dancers. Lena smiled faintly. I have work. There will always be work. The old woman sat beside her. For a few moments neither spoke. Then Ayana nodded toward the gathering crowd. Many girls came this year. Lena glanced toward them. Yes. Do they frighten you? Lena laughed softly. Why would they? The old woman smiled knowingly. Because old women notice things others missed. Because they have everything you don't. The words landed harder than Lena expected. For a moment, she stared into the fire. Then she shrugged. That isn't their fault. Ayana's eyes softened. No, it isn't. The old woman rose slowly. Before leaving, she placed something into Lena's hand. A small piece of sweet bread. Freshly baked. Rare. Lena looked surprised. A gift. Ayana nodded. You looked hungry. Then she walked away. Lena stared at the bread. A simple act. Nothing important. Yet suddenly, she remembered the stranger's words from the night before. Kindness is rarely forgotten. For reasons she couldn't explain, she smiled. Across the camp, the stranger noticed. And for the first time all day, he smiled too. Only for a second. Only long enough for nobody else to see. But someone did. A young chief's daughter named White Dove. One of the favorites to become queen. Her eyes narrowed immediately. She followed the direction of the stranger's gaze. Straight to Lena. The smile vanished from her face. Something cold entered her expression. Something dangerous. And for the first time since arriving at Ghost Wind Camp, Lena unknowingly attracted the attention of someone who viewed every other woman as competition. Even a servant. Even a captive. Even a girl nobody was supposed to notice. The following morning brought clear skies. The prairie stretched beneath the rising sun like an endless ocean of gold. Ghost Wind Camp was already awake. Preparations for the moon dance filled every corner of the settlement. Drums echoed from distant fires. Horses moved between the lodges. Women practiced songs that had been passed down for generations. Everywhere Lena looked, people seemed excited, hopeful, anticipating something important. She wished she could feel the same. Instead, she carried 2 water buckets toward the northern side of camp. The same task, the same routine, the same life. At least, that was what she believed. What Lena didn't know was that something else had begun. A test. Not announced. Not explained. And invisible to everyone involved. Including the 100 young women who believed they were competing for the Comanche king's attention. Near the council lodge, several elders sat together speaking quietly. Among them sat the stranger. The same man Lena had helped on the prairie. The wound beneath his ribs was healing. The bandage remained hidden beneath his buckskin shirt. No one noticed. But every time he shifted in his seat, he remembered the servant girl who had torn apart her only dress to help a stranger. An elder beside him spoke. The girls are impressive this year. Several men nodded. They are. Strong families. Good bloodlines. Respected fathers. The stranger remained silent. Another elder laughed. You still haven't shown interest in any of them. A few heads turned toward him. Waiting. The stranger looked across the camp. Toward the crowd of visitors. Toward the dancers. Toward the daughters of powerful chiefs. Then his gaze continued beyond them. Toward someone carrying water. A girl nobody else seemed to notice. He said nothing. The elders exchanged knowing looks. But none pressed further. The morning continued peacefully. Until just after noon. The accident happened near the horse corrals. A young Comanche girl named Little Sparrow had spent the morning following her older brothers. Like most children, she believed herself invincible. That confidence lasted exactly until one of the horses spooked. The animal reared suddenly. Children scattered. Adults shouted warnings. Little Sparrow stumbled backward. Her foot caught in a rope. She fell hard. The frightened horse kicked free and bolted. Dust exploded into the air. Then came the crying. Sharp. Painful. Immediate. The little girl sat in the dirt holding her ankle. Tears streamed down her face. Around her, dozens of people watched, including many of the moon dance contestants. Some paused. Some glanced over. Most continued doing whatever they had been doing. The injury didn't appear serious. Someone else would help. Someone always did. One of the chief's daughters hesitated briefly, then returned to adjusting her jewelry. Another continued practicing a dance. A third barely looked up at all. Meanwhile, across camp, Lena heard the crying. Without thinking, she set down her water buckets, then ran. By the time she reached the corral, the child was still alone, still crying, Still frightened, Lena knelt beside her immediately. Hey. The little girl looked up through tears. My ankle hurts. I know. Lena smiled softly. Let's look at it. The child sniffled. Several adults now watched from nearby, but Lena ignored them. She carefully examined the ankle. Nothing broken, just twisted. Painful, but not dangerous. The girl tried standing. Immediately winced. Lena caught her before she fell. Easy. The little girl clung to her arm, fear replacing the tears. What if I can't dance anymore? Lena blinked. Dance. Little Sparrow nodded miserably. For moon dance. The answer nearly made Lena laugh. Children worried about the strangest things. You'll dance again. The girl looked uncertain. Promise. Lena thought about it, then nodded. I promise. The child finally smiled. A small one, but real. Lena lifted her carefully and carried her toward the healer's lodge. The entire time, she remained completely unaware of how many people were watching, or who those people were. Near the council fire, the stranger sat silently, observing. An elder beside him followed his gaze. The white girl. The stranger said nothing. The elder continued. Interesting. Still no response. Yet everyone seated there had seen the same thing. The daughters of power had looked away. The servant girl had run toward the problem. No hesitation. No calculation. No audience to impress. Only instinct. Only kindness. The elder smiled faintly. Some lessons revealed themselves without words. The afternoon passed. Little Sparrow's injury proved minor. By sunset, she was already limping around camp, proudly showing everyone her bandaged ankle. Lena returned to work. Unaware, she had become the topic of several quiet conversations. That evening, another gathering took place around the central fire. Music, food, stories. The visiting women sat together, laughing, competing, showing off dresses and jewelry. White Dove remained among them, beautiful as ever, confident as ever. Yet her attention kept drifting elsewhere. Toward Lena, toward the servant girl, toward the growing number of people who seemed to be noticing her. Something about that bothered her deeply. As darkness settled across the prairie, the stranger rose from the council fire. The movement immediately drew attention. People watched. Warriors stepped aside. Elders fell silent. The respect surrounding him was impossible to miss. Lena noticed too. For the first time, a question formed in her mind. Not who he was. Something bigger. Why did everyone listen when he spoke? The stranger paused briefly. His eyes found Lena across the camp. Only for a moment. Then he disappeared into the darkness beyond the lodges, leaving her with more questions than answers. And somewhere deep inside, a growing feeling that their second meeting had not been an accident. Only one day remained before the moon dance. By sunrise, Ghost Wind Camp had become the busiest place on the prairie. More visitors arrived every hour. Warriors guarded the outer edges of camp. Traders set up temporary stalls. Children ran through the lodges carrying stories and rumors. Everywhere Lena went, she heard the same question. Who would the king choose? Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a prediction. Most agreed on one thing. The future queen would come from an important family, a respected bloodline, someone admired, someone powerful. No one ever mentioned Lena, which was perfectly fine with her. Or at least that was what she told herself. The morning passed quickly. She carried water, prepared cooking fires, cleaned guest lodges, worked harder than ever. The growing crowd meant more work for the servants. Far more work. By midday, exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. But she continued, because stopping changed nothing. Near the center of camp, several young women gathered beneath a shade shelter. Among them sat White Dove, the daughter of Chief Running Elk. Beautiful, intelligent, and widely considered the favorite. Several girls listened as she spoke. My father says the king must think about the future. The others nodded. Of course. He cannot choose carelessly. White Dove smiled. He needs someone who understands leadership. The meaning behind her words was obvious. She believed she was describing herself. Nobody argued. Most agreed. Then one of the younger girls pointed across camp. Toward Lena. The servant girl was carrying a basket nearly as large as she was. The younger girl giggled. What if he chooses her? The entire group burst into laughter. Even White Dove smiled. But there was something forced about it. Something uneasy. That would never happen. The words came too quickly, too sharply. Several girls exchanged glances. The conversation moved on. Yet White Dove's eyes continued following Lena. Watching, measuring, the same way hunters watched unfamiliar tracks. Across camp, Lena remained unaware. She had more immediate concerns. One of the guest horses had escaped its tether. The animal wandered between the lodges, creating chaos. Children chased after it. Adults shouted. The horse only became more nervous. Finally, Lena stepped into its path. Slowly, carefully, speaking softly, the horse snorted, tossed its head, then gradually settled. Several nearby warriors watched with surprise. Within moments, she had returned the animal to its owner. The grateful trader thanked her. Lena simply nodded and returned to work. The incident would have been forgotten, except someone important had witnessed it. Again, from the council area, the stranger observed everything. Not just the horse, not just the kindness, the patience, the calmness, the absence of pride. Many people performed good deeds when others were watching. Lena seemed to forget anyone was watching at all. That difference mattered, more than most people realized. As evening approached, preparations for the moon dance reached their peak. The great ceremonial fire was built in the center of camp. Fresh cedar wood stacked high. Decorations hung from poles. Musicians tuned drums. Families gathered together. Anticipation filled the air. The entire prairie seemed to be holding its breath. That evening, Grandmother Ayana found Lena near the cooking fires. "You should rest." Lena laughed softly. "After tomorrow." The old woman shook her head. "You always say that." "Because it's true." Ayana smiled. Then her eyes drifted downward, toward the small crescent moon token hanging from a cord around Lena's neck. The token the stranger had given her. The old woman's expression changed immediately. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. Deep recognition. "Where did you get that?" Lena instinctively touched the wooden moon. "A friend." The answer sounded strange. She barely knew the man. Ayana studied her carefully. What kind of friend? Lena hesitated. She honestly didn't know. Someone kind. Someone mysterious. Someone she kept thinking about far more often than she should. The old woman nodded slowly, yet said nothing more, as though she had suddenly understood something. Something Lena could not. The sky darkened. Stars appeared one by one. Music began spreading across camp. Tonight was not yet moon dance, but it felt close enough. Groups gathered around fires. Stories filled the air. Laughter drifted across the prairie. For a brief moment, Lena allowed herself to sit. Just sit. No work. No chores. No orders. Only the stars. Only the wind. Only silence. Then footsteps approached. She looked up. White Dove stood before her. Perfectly dressed. Perfectly poised. Several other young women stood behind her. Watching. Waiting. White Dove smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "I heard you helped Little Sparrow." Lena nodded. "Anyone would have." White Dove's smile widened slightly. "No." Her eyes hardened. "Not anyone." The words carried a meaning Lena didn't understand. At least not immediately. White Dove stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You should remember your place." The prairie seemed suddenly quieter. Lena met her gaze. For the first time. Directly. Neither woman looked away. White Dove finally smiled again, then turned and walked off. The others followed, leaving Lena alone beneath the stars. Confused. Uneasy. And for the first time since arriving at Ghost Wind Camp. Concerned. Because White Dove hadn't sounded angry. She had sounded threatened. Far across the camp, the stranger had watched the entire exchange. His expression never changed. Yet one of the older elders beside him noticed the tightening of his jaw. A small thing. Almost invisible. But enough. The elder smiled faintly, then looked toward the growing moon above the prairie. Tomorrow night the moon dance would begin. 100 young women would gather before the fire. The entire Comanche nation would watch. And before the night was over, a choice would be made. A choice that would leave the camp speechless. The night of the moon dance finally arrived. By sunset, Ghost Wind Camp looked unlike anything Lena had ever seen. Hundreds of lanterns glowed between the lodges. The great ceremonial fire stood ready in the center of camp. Its stacked cedar wood towered above the crowd. Drums echoed across the prairie. Slow, deep, ancient. The sound seemed to rise from the earth itself. People arrived from every direction. Families, warriors, elders, traders, children. Everyone wanted to witness the moon dance. Everyone wanted to see who the king would choose. Lena wanted nothing more than to stay invisible. Unfortunately, invisible people still had work to do. She spent most of the evening carrying food between the fires, refilling water containers, cleaning dishes, doing everything possible to avoid being noticed. Yet the closer the ceremony came, the harder that became. Everywhere she turned, people were talking, speculating, guessing, arguing. White Dove will win. No. Red Willow. My money is on Morning Star. Each name belonged to a beautiful young woman. Each woman wore clothing finer than anything Lena had ever owned. As darkness fully settled over the prairie, the contestants began gathering. 100 young women. Exactly as the stories promised. They formed a wide circle around the great fire. The sight was breathtaking. Beaded dresses shimmered beneath the moonlight. Silver ornaments reflected the flames. Many had spent months preparing for this night. Many had spent years dreaming about it. Lena watched only briefly, then returned to carrying supplies, because none of it concerned her. Or so she thought. Near the edge of camp, Grandmother Ayana suddenly appeared beside her. The old woman smiled. You should come. Lena frowned. Come where? The ceremony. I have work. Ayana shook her head. Not tonight. The old woman took the basket from Lena's hands. Before Lena could protest, the elder was already walking away, leaving her standing there, confused. What am I supposed to do? Ayana glanced back. Watch. That was all she said. Watch. Nothing more. With no other instructions, Lena slowly moved toward the outer edge of the gathering crowd. Far from the fire. Far from the contestants. Far from anyone important. Exactly where she felt she belonged. The drums continued. Steady. Powerful. Ancient. Then silence gradually settled over the prairie. One by one, conversations ended. Children stopped talking. Even the horses seemed quieter. The moment had arrived. Several respected elders stepped forward. Ceremonial words were spoken. Blessings were offered. The moon dance officially began. One by one, the contestants entered the circle. Some danced gracefully. Some sang. Others demonstrated traditional skills. The crowd watched with admiration. Applause followed each performance. White Dove received some of the loudest praise. She moved beautifully, confidently, like someone already imagining herself as queen. The crowd clearly approved. Lena remained near the back, watching, listening, waiting for the night to end. Then something unexpected happened. A small child suddenly broke free from her mother and ran directly toward the ceremonial fire. The girl couldn't have been more than 4 years old, too young to understand danger. Several people shouted. The child kept running, straight toward the flames. Gasps spread through the crowd. The dancers froze. The musicians stopped playing. For one brief moment, everyone seemed shocked into stillness. Everyone except Lena. Without thinking, she moved. The same way she had moved toward Little Sparrow. The same way she had moved toward the injured stranger. Instinct. Nothing else. She reached the child just before the little girl stumbled near the fire pit. Lena scooped her into her arms, protecting her, comforting her, whispering softly until the crying stopped. The frightened mother arrived moments later. Relief filled her face. Thank you. Lena nodded awkwardly, then handed the child back. The entire thing lasted less than a minute. Nothing heroic, nothing dramatic, just a small act of kindness. Yet when Lena finally looked up, she realized the entire gathering had seen it. Hundreds of eyes, watching. The attention made her uncomfortable immediately, so she stepped backward, toward the edge of the crowd, wanting the moment to disappear, wanting everyone to forget. But not everyone forgot. Near the front of the gathering, White Dove watched with growing frustration. Again it was the servant girl. Again people were noticing her. Again she was receiving attention she had done nothing to earn. At least that was how White Dove saw it. Across the fire, the stranger watched as well. Unlike everyone else, his expression remained calm. Yet inside, the final pieces were falling into place. Because this was the third time. Third time. No audience. No reward. No expectation. Only kindness. That mattered. More than beauty. More than status. More than bloodlines. Far more. The drums began again. Slowly. The ceremony moved forward. Yet something had changed. A feeling. A tension. An invisible current moving through the crowd. People sensed it, even if they didn't understand it. The moon hung high above the prairie, bright and silver. The sacred fire crackled beneath it. And for the first time all evening, the stranger rose from his place among the elders. The movement instantly drew attention. The entire crowd fell silent. Warriors straightened. Elders lowered their heads respectfully. The contestants watched with anticipation. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The moment when the king would finally reveal his choice. Lena froze. King. The word struck her like lightning. Slowly, very slowly, her eyes lifted toward the man standing beside the fire. The stranger, the wounded rider, the man she had fed, the man she had bandaged, the man who carried the crescent moon token, the man she thought was merely a warrior. A terrible realization washed over her. No, not a warrior. The king. And as the entire Comanche nation watched, his eyes found hers across the fire. Silence spread across Ghost Wind Camp. Not ordinary silence. The kind that arrives when hundreds of people hold the same breath at the same moment. The king stood beside the great ceremonial fire. Moonlight reflected across the silver ornaments woven into his clothing. The flames danced behind him. For the first time since Lena had met him, she saw him clearly. Not as a wounded stranger. Not as a mysterious warrior. But as the man everyone else already knew. The Comanche king. The most respected leader on the prairie. Her heart began pounding. Memories rushed through her mind. The bandage. The corn cake. The conversation beneath the stars. The carved moon hanging around her neck. Every moment suddenly looked different. Every moment suddenly made sense. Around the fire, 100 young women waited. Their eyes never left the king. Many smiled confidently. Some clasped their hands together. Others silently prayed. Years of dreams had led them to this night. The elders stepped back. The drums stopped. The fire crackled softly. Nothing else moved. The king slowly surveyed the circle. His gaze passed over every contestant. White Dove lifted her chin. Certain. Composed. Prepared. Several young women exchanged hopeful glances. The crowd waited. And waited. Finally, the king spoke. His voice carried easily across the camp. I have listened. Silence. I have watched. More silence. I have learned. The words settled over the prairie. No one interrupted. No one dared. The king continued. Many of you are talented. His eyes moved across the contestants. Many of you are wise. Another pause. Many of you come from honorable families. Several fathers smiled proudly. Several mothers nodded. The king lowered his gaze briefly, as if considering something important. Then he looked back toward the crowd. But leadership is not beauty. The word surprised many, confused others. The king continued. It is not wealth. White Dove's smile faded slightly. It is not bloodline. Now people exchanged glances. Uncertain, the king stepped forward. One slow step. The firelight shifted across his face. It is character. Nobody spoke. The prairie itself seemed silent. The king turned slightly, looking toward the outer edge of the gathering, toward the place where no contestant stood, toward the place where servants usually waited, toward Lena. Her stomach dropped. No, surely not. There had to be someone standing behind her. Someone important. Someone worthy. The king's gaze never moved. Neither did hers. Fear, confusion, disbelief, all collided inside her chest. The crowd began noticing. Heads turned. People followed the king's line of sight. One by one. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Until nearly everyone in Ghost Wind Camp was staring at the same person. Lena. Whispers erupted immediately. Small at first. Then louder. Then impossible to ignore. The servant. The white girl. It can't be. White Dove went completely still. The color drained from her face. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in her eyes. The king began walking. The crowd parted instantly. No one blocked his path. No one spoke. His footsteps sounded impossibly loud against the silence. One step, then another, straight toward Lena. Her legs felt weak. She wanted to move, wanted to disappear, wanted to wake up. Instead, she remained frozen. The king stopped in front of her. The entire camp watched. The entire prairie seemed to watch. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the king smiled. A small smile. The same one she had seen beneath the stars. The same one she had seen beside the prairie trail. The same one nobody else had ever received. Recognition. Not ceremony. Recognition. You helped a stranger. The words were spoken softly, yet everyone heard them. Lena's throat tightened. The king continued. You shared food when you barely had enough for yourself. Silence. You helped a frightened child. Several people looked toward Little Sparrow's family. The girl immediately smiled. The king looked directly into Lena's eyes. You never knew anyone was watching. A wave of understanding moved through the elders. The test. This had been the test all along. Not dancing. Not beauty. Not family names. Character. Nothing else. White Dove stared in disbelief. Everything she had spent months preparing for suddenly felt meaningless. The king slowly reached toward Lena. Gasps spread through the crowd. Lena could barely breathe. Then he took her hand. Not forcefully. Not possessively. Gently. As though giving her a choice. As though acknowledging her dignity before everyone present. The crowd erupted. Shock. Confusion. Disbelief. Some smiled. Some stared. Some openly protested. The noise spread across the camp like wildfire. Yet the king never looked away from Lena. Not once. For the first time in her life. Someone important was looking at her as though she mattered. Not because of what she could do. Not because of who owned her. Not because of what she looked like. Simply because she was herself. Tears unexpectedly filled her eyes. She blinked them away. Embarrassed. The king noticed. But said nothing. Because some moments needed silence more than words. Then an elder stepped forward. His voice carried above the crowd. The king has made his choice. The words echoed across the prairie. Final. Absolute. Real. A choice that would be talked about for generations. A choice no one had expected. A choice that changed everything. But before the celebration could begin, before the crowd could fully react, a voice suddenly cut through the night. Cold. Sharp. Angry. White Dove. This is a mistake. The entire camp fell silent once more. The king slowly turned. The firelight flickered between them. And for the first time that evening, the real confrontation began. White Dove's words hung in the night air. This is a mistake. The fire crackled softly. No one moved. No one spoke. For several seconds, Ghost Wind Camp seemed frozen beneath the moon. White Dove stepped forward. Her face remained calm, but anger burned behind her eyes. This woman is not one of us. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. White Dove continued. She was not born Comanche. Another pause. She is a servant. The word landed heavily. Servant. As though it explained everything. As though it ended the discussion. As though a person's worth could be measured by the work they performed. Lena lowered her eyes. Not because she agreed. Because she had heard those words her entire life. Servant. Captive. Nobody. Different names. Same meaning. The king remained silent, allowing White Dove to speak, allowing everyone to reveal what they truly believed. White Dove turned toward the crowd, confident again, certain she was winning. Many women here have spent years preparing for this responsibility. Several contestants nodded. My family has served this nation for generations. More approval. I have studied leadership. A few elders exchanged glances. White Dove lifted her chin proudly. How can a servant girl understand what is required? Silence followed. A dangerous silence. The kind that often appears when people believe they are speaking obvious truths. Lena felt hundreds of eyes on her. Waiting. Judging. Measuring. The old feeling returned. The familiar one. The feeling of standing in a room where everyone else belonged. Everyone except her. For a moment, she considered leaving. Simply walking away. It would be easier. Safer. More familiar. Then something unexpected happened. Grandmother Iona stood. The old woman rarely spoke during public gatherings. When she did, people listened. Her voice was quiet, yet every word carried. I have a question. White Dove immediately nodded. Of course. Iona looked toward the contestants, then toward the crowd, then finally toward Lena. If leadership comes from bloodlines. She paused. Why did kindness come from her? The question struck the gathering like a sudden gust of wind. No one answered. Iona continued. When little Sparrow fell, who ran first? Silence. When the child reached the fire, who moved? More silence. When a wounded stranger needed help, who stopped? Now even White Dove looked uncomfortable. The old woman nodded slowly. Asking questions is easy. Her eyes swept across the crowd. Character is harder. No one argued. Because everyone knew the answer. They had witnessed it themselves. White Dove's face tightened. Yet she refused to surrender. Kindness alone is not enough. The king finally spoke. No. Every head turned toward him. His voice remained calm. Kindness alone is not enough. White Dove smiled slightly, until the king continued. But without kindness, everything else becomes meaningless. The smile vanished instantly. The prairie fell silent again. The king stepped forward. Moonlight reflected across the carved moon token hanging around Lena's neck. Several elders noticed. Recognition spread among them. One by one, the symbol meant something. Something older than most people realized. The king looked directly at Lena. Not the crowd. Not White Dove. Only Lena. Then he asked a question. A simple question. Perhaps the most important question anyone had ever asked her. What do you want? Lena blinked. The words barely made sense. What do you want? No one had ever asked that. Not truly. People gave orders. Made decisions. Expected obedience. But choice? Choice belonged to other people. Not her. The silence stretched. The king waited patiently, never rushing her, never answering for her. For the first time in her life, the decision belonged entirely to her. Tears threatened again. This time she didn't hide them. She looked around the camp. At the fires. At the prairie. At the people. Some still doubted her. Some still judged her. But others smiled. Little Sparrow smiled. Iona smiled. Several elders smiled. For the first time since arriving among the Comanche, she saw something she had never expected. Acceptance. Not complete. Not perfect. But real. Slowly, Lena looked back at the king. Her voice trembled slightly. Not from fear. From honesty. I don't want power. The crowd listened. I don't want status. The fire crackled. The moon hung overhead. Lena swallowed. Then continued. I only ever wanted a place where I belong. The words were simple, yet they seemed to reach every corner of the camp. Every person understood them. Because deep down, most people wanted exactly the same thing. A home. A family. A place to belong. The king's expression softened. Not because of her answer. Because of its truth. He nodded once, then slowly released her hand. Gasps spread through the crowd. Confusion immediately followed. Had he changed his mind? Had he reconsidered? Lena felt her stomach tighten. Then the king took one step backward, giving her space, giving her freedom, giving her something nobody else ever had. A choice. You owe me nothing. The words echoed through the gathering. You are not my prisoner. Silence. You are not my obligation. More silence. You are free to leave tomorrow. Lena stared at him. The crowd stared too. The king continued. Or stay. Nothing more. No pressure. No command. No promise of wealth. No promise of status. Only freedom. Real freedom. Perhaps for the first time in her entire life. Tears rolled down Lena's cheeks. Not because she was sad. Because she suddenly understood something. The king had not chosen her because he wanted to own her. He had chosen her because he respected her. The difference changed everything. Far across the crowd, White Dove lowered her eyes. For the first time that night, she understood why she had lost. Not because Lena was more beautiful. Not because Lena was more important. Because Lena had never been trying to win. The drums began again. Softly. Slowly. Like a heartbeat. And beneath the silver moon above Ghost Wind Camp, a servant girl who had once believed she belonged nowhere finally discovered something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The morning after the moon dance arrived quietly. No drums. No celebrations. No grand speeches. Only the sound of wind moving through the prairie grass. Only the distant cries of waking birds. And the soft golden light of dawn spreading across Ghost Wind Camp. Lena sat alone on a small hill overlooking the camp. For the first time in many months. No one had given her orders. No one had assigned her chores. No one expected anything from her. The feeling was unfamiliar. Almost frightening. Below her, the camp slowly awakened. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children chased each other between lodges. Warriors prepared horses for the day. Life continued, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything had changed. Because for the first time in her life, Lena's future belonged to her. The words the king had spoken the night before still echoed inside her mind. You are free to leave tomorrow. Or stay. Such simple words. Yet no gift had ever felt larger. No treasure. No promise. No crown. Only freedom. She had spent most of her life belonging to someone else. First to circumstance. Then to fear. Then to survival. Now, for the first time, she belonged to herself. Footsteps approached behind her. Lena already knew who it was. The king sat beside her without speaking. For several moments, they simply watched the sunrise together. The prairie stretched endlessly before them. Beautiful. Quiet. Alive. At last, the king broke the silence. Have you decided? Lena smiled softly. Not because the answer was easy. Because she finally had won. I have. The king nodded. Waiting. Never rushing. Never demanding. The same way he always seemed to wait. Patiently. Respectfully. Lena looked toward the camp below. Toward the people she had once believed would never accept her. Little Sparrow was already running through the grass. Her ankle completely healed. Grandmother Iana stood beside a fire, speaking with several women. Even some of the people who once ignored Lena now greeted her with small smiles. Not because she had been chosen, because they had finally seen her. Truly seen her. Lena looked back toward the king. When I first came here, her voice was quiet. I counted the days until I could leave. The king listened. I thought this place would always feel temporary. She paused. The wind moved through her hair. But somewhere along the way, a faint smile appeared. It stopped feeling like a prison. Emotion flickered briefly across the king's face. Small, but real. Lena looked toward the horizon, then spoke the words she never imagined saying. I want to stay. The prairie seemed quieter afterward, as though even the wind had paused to listen. The king smiled. Not the smile of a ruler receiving obedience. The smile of a man hearing honesty. Nothing more. Nothing less. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched the morning arrive. The beginning of something neither fully understood yet. Hours later, word spread through the camp. Lena had chosen to stay. Not because she was ordered. Not because she was forced. Because she wanted to. The difference mattered. People understood that. Even White Dove. Especially White Dove. Late that afternoon, she approached Lena alone. No audience. No followers. No competition. Only two women standing beneath the same prairie sky. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then White Dove lowered her eyes. A gesture nobody expected. Not from her. I was wrong. The words came quietly. Honestly. Lena blinked. White Dove gave a small laugh. I thought being chosen was something you won. She shook her head. It isn't. The bitterness that once filled her voice seemed gone. Replaced by understanding. Painful understanding. Then she smiled. A genuine smile this time. I hope you find what you're looking for. Lena smiled back. So do I. White Dove left soon afterward. Not defeated. Changed. Sometimes that was the greater victory. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. The story of the moon dance spread beyond Ghost Wind Camp. Across the prairie. Across trading routes. Across distant settlements. People told the story around campfires. Again and again. Some remembered the 100 beautiful women. Some remembered the great ceremony. But most remembered something else. A servant girl. A forgotten captive. A young woman everyone overlooked. Until the king saw what nobody else bothered to see. Her heart. Years later, children would still ask about that moon dance. And elders would smile before telling the story. Not because it was romantic. Not because it was unusual. Because it reminded people of something important. That dignity does not come from titles. Or wealth. Or bloodlines. It comes from character. The moon rose again above Ghost Wind Camp. Silver light washed across the prairie. Across the lodges. Across the fires. Across the place Lena now called home. And somewhere beneath that endless sky, a young woman who once believed she belonged nowhere finally understood the truth. Home is not the place where people tell you who you are. Home is the place where you are free to become yourself. The moon remembered her name. And so did the people.